As a police officer, his client would be in danger if he were kept in prison pending his trial. Solicitor Daryl Ingrams told Luton magistrates on June 28, 2007. Until his arrest days earlier, Inspector Gary Weddle had been in charge of the custody suite at Barnet Police Station in North London. But now the 47-year-old officer was in custody himself, charged with his wife's murder. In the dock, he showed no emotion as the court was told how 5 months earlier, on January 31st, 44-year-old Sandra Weddle, a nurse at Luton and Dunstable Hospital, had been found dead at the couple's Bedfordshire home in Lankett Avenue, Dunstable. They had 3 young children. And on the day she died, Mrs. Weddle had gone to a school in Dunstable to invigilate at an exam, the prosecutor, Miss Sarah Brown, told the court. Sandra Weddle's colleagues had told the police that she behaved perfectly normally that morning, showing no signs of stress. The last sighting of her alive, apart from by her husband, was at 11:25 a.m. He was preparing to set out to start his shift at 3 p.m. when she returned home. Later that day, the Weddle children were not collected from school, as was the normal routine, the prosecutor continued. Mrs. Weddle had normally collected them. Neighbors took them into their care and made arrangements to contact Mr. Weddle at his place of work. He returned home from work, but before going to his own house, he unusually went to a neighbor's home and asked him to accompany him 12 True Crime to check the house for his wife. Her car was in the drive, and in checking the house with the neighbor, Weddle did not go into the garage, Miss Brown said. At about 9:15 a.m. the next day, after taking the children to school, he asked another neighbor to join him, saying he had found Sandra dead in the garage. A cable tie was around her neck, and the prosecutor said that an autopsy had established that Mrs. Weddle was strangled. The pathologist also found signs that she had been involved in a fight or a scuffle prior to her death. He noted an abrasion to the left side of her neck. The cable tie had been pulled up and backwards to her left-hand side, and the angle of injury is difficult to reconcile with self-inflicted injury. There were fresh injuries to the knuckles of the victim's hands. At the scene, an apparent suicide note was found. This was discovered on the floor of the garage beside the victim's body. It was a typed note, although no fingerprints could be found. Marks consistent with having been made by a glove were found on the note. Experts examined the hard drive of the family computer, and they were able to say it was last turned on at 10:14 a.m. on January 30th and turned off at 10:29 a.m. At this time, Mr. Weddle was the only person present in the family home. Mrs. Weddle was at the school invigilating at the exam. A forensic linguistic examiner looked at the note and other writings known to have come from Sandra Weddle and Gary Weddle, and that expert concluded it was highly unlikely that Sandra Weddle wrote that note and highly likely that Gary Weddle had written it. Experienced officers were suspicious from the outset, given the unusual and bizarre means of death, Miss Brown went on. From checks made with police forces throughout the UK, it was learned that there had been only 3 previous deaths involving cable ties, and each was a murder. Mr. Weddle was initially treated as a significant witness and provided details to investigators. It was quite apparent that the relationship was going through a difficult phase. In fact, Mr. Weddle had discovered at Christmas that his wife had been having an affair, and he stated she had been behaving irrationally. Her diary would seem to indicate a woman with future plans. She had communicated to her husband that she wanted a divorce. So Weddle faced losing his children, his £450,000 home, and having to split his police pension with his wife. He had told detectives that case report by a W. Moss on the morning of January 30th he was in the gym at the bottom of his garden, and when his wife returned home around 11:30 a.m. she wept inconsolably for more than an hour and was so abusive that he left for work about an hour and a half earlier than usual. The prosecutor said that after his arrest, as he was being transferred from Ampthill Police Station to the magistrate's court, a length of cable was spotted wrapped around his ankle. He had removed the flex from a television set in an interview room at the police station. He was asked what the cable was for and he said, "I just want to go to sleep." Applying for bail, Mr. Ingram said that Weddle had complied with police requests throughout the investigation. Being kept in custody would not necessarily stop him from attempting suicide, and as a policeman in prison he would be at risk of attacks by other prisoners. Weddle's brother, a barrister, offered a surety of £200,000, describing him as his soulmate and saying the inspector could live with him at his £800,000 home in Horsell, Surrey, on which there was a relatively small mortgage outstanding. The magistrates rejected the application, but at Ipswich Crown Court in the following September bail was granted by Judge John Bevan, Weddle's brother putting up the £200,000 surety. The bail's conditions were that Weddle move in with his brother in Surrey, stay out of Bedfordshire, and have only weekly, supervised, access to his children. For months after he was released, his defense lawyers learned that his Danish-born mother-in-law 70-year-old Mrs. Trot Maxfield was to give evidence for the prosecution at his trial, which was scheduled to be held in May 2008. His children were living with his brother-in-law, a Bedfordshire policeman, who raised the alarm on January 12 when Weddle didn't turn up for his weekly supervised access to them. Then at 11:45 a.m. the same day, Weddle's body was found in a field near Broomhills Shooting Club at Margate, Hertfordshire. He had apparently shot himself in the head. Mrs. Maxfield was listed as his next of kin, and after his body was discovered, officers went to her home 10 miles away in Gustard Wood, near Wheathampstead, Hertfordshire, to inform her of his death. There was no response to their knocks on the door, and on entering the house they found her body in the living room. She, too, had been shot dead. After killing her, Weddle had apparently driven to the shooting club in his metallic green Renault Laguna and then turned the gun on himself. His car was found at the club, and the police said they were not looking for anyone else in connection with the killings. Weddle was a former member of the shooting club, which he had left when he was charged with murder, and his firearms license was left. Weddle's second victim, his mother-in-law Trot Maxfield. Above, an aerial view showing police tape around the Gustard Wood home of Mrs. Maxfield following the discovery of her body. Inset above, the field near Broomhills Shooting Club where the body of Gary Weddle was found revoked, but he had somehow managed to obtain another gun. Mrs. Maxfield had divorced Sandra Weddle's father and had married elderly William Maxfield after spending several years as his carer. After his death in 2007 at the age of 92, she had continued to live in their £1 million house. Trot was terribly worried when her son-in-law got let out on bail, said a friend and neighbor. She certainly didn't trust him. She thought he was capable of anything, and she feared that he would be let off when the case came up in May. I don't know why she was so anti him. She did tell me her daughter was unhappy and had wanted to leave. Within hours, Mrs. Maxfield's murder prompted calls for an inquiry into why Weddle had been granted bail. This case raises very serious questions, said Nick Herbert, the Shadow Justice Secretary. The public will find it extraordinary that anybody on a murder charge should be given bail. Two people would be alive today if the judge had not given bail to this gentleman, said Mike Penning, the MP for Hemel Hempstead. The courts should be protectants, not putting people at risk. Both the Crown Prosecution Service and ourselves were totally against Weddle being freed on bail, said a police spokesman. Now our fears appear to have been vindicated in the most tragic of ways. For the CPS, a spokesman confirmed, we vigorously opposed the applications for bail at every court hearing. It was extremely unusual for someone charged with murder to be freed on bail, a leading defense counsel, Owen Davies QC, told The Guardian. In reaching bail decisions, he said, judges had to consider whether the defendant was likely to commit a further crime, abscond, or interfere with witnesses. Judge Bevan said he could not remember why he granted Weddle bail. I hope there will be transcripts of the two bail applications. These would explain things. I can't remember the precise details, so it would be wholly inappropriate to comment at this time. For the Ministry of Justice, a spokesman said, we do not comment on individual cases. The decision on whether to grant bail is one for the courts. However, we will monitor the outcome of the inquest and respond to any recommendations in due course. When transcripts of Weddle's bail hearing were made public in February 2008, it emerged that a psychiatric assessment carried out while he was in custody was among factors which persuaded Judge Bevan to release him. There was at least one psychiatric report that the judge considered which said that the defendant did not pose a risk to himself, said a Judicial Communications Office source. Weddle had convinced the psychiatrist that he was sane and posed no danger, and this, together with the £200,000 bail put up by his brother, his 25 years police service,